Like a lot of people here, I grew up in a working class family. My father was a printer, my mother was a housekeeper in a convalescent home. And we didn't have books in the house or anything like that. But for some reason, very young, I decided I wanted to be a writer. And I wasn't really sure what that looked like. So I kind of made up what I thought a writer's life should be from books I read or films or something. And the idea I got was you should be poor, you should be miserable, you should be lonely, probably alcoholic, bonus points for tuberculosis, that kind of thing. And I also read that writers, like, they got together and they got drunk and had sex, and then they went home and wrote forever. And so I was intrigued by the whole idea of salons, you know, like in Paris and London they had salons at night. And in our family, we just all sat down in front of the TV and my dad drank beer and, you know, that was it. So I decided I wanted to have a salon in my house. And I to this day, I can't believe my family agreed to it. But I said, you know, once a week, we all bring a book and we talk about the book. And so they actually did it. My father bought a manual for one of the presses at where he worked. And his first line was, "Oil and ink don't mix." And then my mother, even more disappointing, brought a cookbook with her favorite recipes marked. It wasn't like Virginia Woolf, Dostoevsky, it wasn't even Erica Young. And so I was like, that's it. That was my first and last salon. To everyone's relief, of course. So, you know, I had to work my way through college. I didn't do an MFA because I was broke, and at that ancient time, we didn't really do those so much. And I still had this idea, this sort of 18th century idea that you should work alone and, you know, be poor. So that's what I did for about 15 years. And then I hooked up with another writer, and when I met Carla and we started living together, she went for the very first time to Sandra's workshop. And she came back just like radiant and excited, so inspired, and these people she met were so wonderful. And she said, well, you should go. And I was like, I can't go. You know, like, I'm a white girl, and it's not for me, and I can't just go on your coattails. So I didn't go. And then the next year, same thing, she went, she came back, she's like, you should go. Sandra said you could. And I had never met Sandra, and I was like, why would she say that? She just did, just come. So the next year I did, with a lot of trepidation, not knowing how I would be accepted or, you know, if people would take me seriously. But it was, I had written, you know, the typical bloated 800-page novel, which I had given to Carla, and watched it sit under her bed for about 2 months until she finally admitted that it was unreadable. So, it was wild. Anyway, so I had published maybe a few articles or stories or reviews, but I hadn't published a novel. So that's who I was when I came, but I was just, it was the first year it was in Sandra's kitchen, and it was, some of you were probably there, and it was just something I had never experienced before, this feeling of openness and acceptance and trust and excitement, you know, that we were there. And it was a whole new world for me to see that the miserable life I had imagined was not necessarily what I had to live.
Thank you. Exclusive what you were thinking of your friends. So a little bit of background. So I, before coming to Macondo, I had already gotten my MFA. I also was a working class kid with no books at home. My first career was engineering, so I discovered writing much later in life. and I had a book already, but and again I did the MFA, but I didn't feel like I had found my family, even in a place like Miami. It wasn't, especially Miami back in the 80s, where it was quite the cultural scene, but also in terms of politics. I always felt like I purposely, in my first book, felt like I was being apolitical because I grew up in such a politically charged place with politics that I didn't necessarily agree with. So it kind of made me shy to pull back from the political. And I'll remember clear as day when Sandra invited me to come to Macondo, and I said, I'm not a political writer, like, right? And she said, yes, you are. I'm like, no, I'm not. She said, yes, you are. It's like, no, I'm not. And she'll remind me every time I see her to this day. See, I told you, but so I think that's where I came here as a writer, thinking I'm not that political person. Cubans have sort of a bit of another sense sometimes of exceptionalism in another way. And what I learned was that, in fact, I am a political writer. That being a political writer is not just what you write about, but it's who your family is, right? Who is it? What are your value systems? What do you fight for beyond even the page, right? What do you want the world to look like? And that's I found my family here, and realized that it also planted a lot of seeds for what eventually would become much more politically, or I like to say, socially conscious work, right? And thinking about it opened up not just about thinking just about the immediate autobiographical sphere of where my writing comes from, of where my poetry comes from, but thinking how that relates to so many other people. And I think coming to Macondo, feeling that, sharing different stories. Again, Miami can be such a bubble, right? And it's much more Pan-Latino now, but when I was growing up, it was just Cubanos, right? So just identifying with other Latino groups that I never got a chance to. I think that's it. That's why I was hooked, and that was about year 2000, right? I think, and proof being that I hadn't met Ruth, but we met here when we first came, and now been besties since how many years now? Well, let's not say. So the lasting friendships that happen across, even if you only see each other once a year, there's something that you take home with you that it's still in your heart, and or like you're saying, home is where your heart is. Just like you keep that home every time you leave here. So.
And then I hear that you were her student.
I'm sorry.
Weren't you a Ruth student? And were you in workshop? Were you in workshop with Ruth? Were you in workshop with Ruth?
Did I workshop?
Yes. Were you her student?
Was Ruth one of my students?
No.
No, we're just hanging around.
No. But at one point, you and I taught a poetry workshop.
That's right.
That I know that Pat was in that workshop. But then subsequently, some years later, I taught a workshop with Marjorie Agostine, the Chilean writer who unfortunately passed away in March. And we taught a workshop called Home, Hearth, Diaspora. And you were in that workshop as our student. and so was Levi Romero, was also among some of the students that I remember. So I think that's one of the interesting things about Macondo, is moving between the student and teacher role, that it isn't a hierarchical thing, but we can move between these different roles.
It's beautiful. I knew I heard something like that.
Well, on top of the hearing going, it's also my memory. It's all better. It's all going.
Well, one of the things that we all do, right? We have a compassionate code of conduct, right? When folks, right, when you apply to Macondo, those of you who are the first time, you could talk about the aspect of community, right, in it. And as we all know, there's craziness in the world right now, right? But I think when we're here together in this community, there's a difference, right? Sometimes I guess maybe there's a sense that maybe we wish we could stay in this community together. So I wanted to ask all of you, what is a role community play in your life, or in writing, or how you see the world now, etc. So the role of community. You want to kick? Okay.
Yeah, I'll kick it off myself.
And then Leslie will go. How's that?
What I would say is that community is our mother. We have to get back to community all the time. And as a writer, you're very solitary, you're in your world, but if I don't have community, I can't really be a writer. I just know that I gotta go in my room and write, and that's me and the world, you know, but I have to think of community as where I get nurtured. And so community's always been important, and if there is no community, you have to make community. That's really important, not just to say there's no community, I got nothing, then help make it. Community is vital for our existence as human beings. And that's why it's constantly being fragmented, constantly being under attack, constantly being blown away, why a lot of us are being taught to be solitary writers with no community. That seems to be part of the systematic way of keeping us away. And so I think it's important to fight for community, build it, and make it if it isn't there. And the other thing I would say is that community is the connection to relationships. Part of the reason I say that is because we grow up getting alienated really quickly. I know I was a very alienated young teenager, really. And when you're living in the streets, you feel alone. You feel very much alone. What was important about community is to understand that that's not the natural way of us being. And we have to get back to what was natural to us. And so I think there's 4 key connections, and I'm just going to share them around, pass it on, that indigenous people have taught me and I've learned over the years. One is the connection to nature, because we're disconnected and alienated from nature. Nature is all around us. We are nature, but we don't even know the trees. We don't understand the ground we walk on. We don't understand nothing. We walk by things. Everything's a cement world, the world that I was in. If you go to LA River, it's a concrete river. And I lived there. I lived in the LA River, and it was just concrete. It was like, you couldn't even have a real river. So I think it's important to connect with nature. The other one is connect to your own nature, because everybody has their own nature. Everybody's got something particular, specific they bring to the world. We're already born whole, complete. You understand what I'm saying? We're not empty when we're born. We're already there, but it's a struggle to get that out. It's a struggle. And then the other one is connect with relationships, because we all have relationships. And not just people, but also animals, the land, everything. We're all related. You know how that is. You know, we're all related. So, and then the 4th thing I would say is, and this is all mythological stories, by the way. They all have these 4 things in one form or the other. Sometimes all 4, 1 or 2. The 4th thing is a relationship with the divine. And I'm always very careful with that, because people think it means religion. It may and may not. It doesn't mean that necessarily. It just means that you have to get to a point where you can touch the other side. The Nepatla place, the in-between places, the portal places. And art and writing, beauty, making beauty is one of the ways to touch the divine.
Well, I'll just talk about a very specific way that I found community through writing. And that was my second novel, Breaking Out of Bedlam, is about an 82-year-old woman who's taken out of her home against her will and put into assisted living. So I wrote it, a lot of it is based on my grandmother's life, but also home is so important to me. I thought, what does it feel like to be taken away from your home, and what's going to happen to me when I'm 82 years old? And so I wrote this book, and it found its way into the community. It somehow filtered down into care homes and senior centers, and I became involved, very involved, with aging in place and elderly rights. I worked a lot for an organization in the Bay Area that was a daycare center for people with Alzheimer's, so that they could come and do arts and you know, get a nice meal, have medical help, and then go home to their families at night. And I gave workshops with people who were living in facilities, coming to senior citizens centers where, you know, they had time on their hands. So I really, when I wrote it, I wasn't thinking in an activist way about it, but I realized just by writing about myself, I was writing about a lot of things that were on people's minds. And people, you know, I got so many letters from care workers, people who had put their parents in places like that, people who were in places like that. So I think if we are writing about ourselves, we're also writing about community. If we really reach down to those places, we have to be connected to everyone else. And I felt very lucky that it came out so specifically and definitely with this book.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So, again, with getting back to the compassion, right? I think in a very private way, the act of writing is also to create compassion for yourself too, right? Like that's part of what, to understand yourself, forgive yourself, and say, process yourself, and say you're okay, right? So I think that, and I think when you do that for yourself, that kind of shows up because other people can see that, right? So I'll say that's one way that I think compassion shows up for me. When I write a poem that, again, is more socially conscious, I try to approach it with compassion in the sense that I question my assumptions about things. I want people to read a poem of mine and walk away, not just perhaps bringing light to something that's politically or social political, but rather asking a question that maybe we haven't asked, maybe finding a direction that I find while I'm writing the poem, right? A new way of understanding. And I think that can only happen when I approach it with some amount of compassion, right? And not just coming to the page with my convictions as if nobody else exists, right? And the other way I think compassion, if you want to sort of think about compassion, activism, giving back, like Leslie was saying, for me, especially one of the reasons I became education ambassador for the Academy of American Arts is that I wanted little kids like me to have access to voices like mine and poetry itself, and not, I never read a living poet till I was, I think, in graduate school. Right, and that is a way of, I think, compassion. If you want to think about all those words, how they all connect together. And so, much like Leslie, if the weirder place that you invite me to read, if it's like community-based, I'm there, gratis, like no questions asked, whatever I can do to make that happen, not only in schools, but in many different communities. And the other way, I consider myself, again, getting back to thinking of myself as not a political poet, I also had never thought I thought activism was like always with the picket sign, that's what I thought activism was. And over the years, I also work with organizations and sort of what I can do best, I think, is lend my voice to them, right? So often I'll offer to write original poem for El Gala that's for raising funds for LGBTQ plus of some kind. So that's the other way I sort of show up as a writer, right? I try to think about opportunities where I can use what I do in ways that help people do things that they do much better than I, right? And so there's a partnership or a collaboration, and that's another way I try to make the work matter, and again, create compassion and echo compassion in the world.
Wonderful. I mean, it's like different ages, like from young people to seniors, right? How do we build inside of those communities? Right? Ruth, how is it important to you? How does it function?
Oh, in many, many different ways. I want to talk about Macondo as a community and then other communities that I'm now a part of. And I just think writing is such an amazing process that connects you with different communities. I never thought I'd be writing for young people as I'm doing now, and now I go to schools and meet kids, and it's just such an amazing experience, and now that's part of the community that I'm writing for. And so as you write, you just connect with different communities depending on who you're writing for. When I started reconnecting with Cuba in the 90s, I was going back and forth to Cuba until 5 years ago. I was going 3-4 times a year, and then working with Richard on a blog called Bridges to From Cuba and trying to connect the diaspora with the island. Those are all things that I thought was so important to create those communities, but it was the writing that was building the bridge towards these different communities. So I think writing is a bridge that opens connections to people and helps to form communities. The other thing is that I think as writers, we're also readers, and I think that's a very important thing to remember. One of my all-time favorite poets, who I got to meet in Cuba before she died, Dulce Maria Loinaz, is an amazing poet, and I asked her for advice one day, and she just had 4 words for me. She said, "Lee más, escribe menos." Read more, write less. That was her advice to me as a poet. I thought that was really interesting. I think what she meant is we do have to be well-read to be good writers. And I think for Sandra, one of the important things that she wanted to do with Macondo was to really encourage craft with conciencia, craft con conciencia. So to really make our craft the best that it could be. She was concerned that sometimes people were rushing things into print, and that we needed to really work on the craft, but not just craft in and of itself, as sometimes happens in creative writing classes, but craft con conciencia, which I think is very, very important to think about. And so I think one of the things with Macondo is that we're reading each other's work and teaching each other and making each other become the best writers that we can be. And I think that's a really important thing that we do at Macondo, and it has created community. I think of like so many people in this room that have been an inspiration to me or have supported me in my writing. Where's John Olivares? I was just talking to John about a new novel that I'm working on, and right before coming into the auditorium, and I thought, I'm so grateful that I know John through Macondo. And I think so many of us have built those friendships that Richard was talking about before, but also these like long-lasting relationships as writers. Reina also, I'm just looking at Reina now, but I mean, oh, there's John, now I see you. Yeah, and I mean, there's so many people in the room that I'd love to mention, but those friendships, those bridges, and I think this is where Sandra has been so amazing, because she is a bridge builder, and she loves to connect her friends with other friends, and to really connect writers with each other. And I think that community that she built, and where's Olivia? Olivia said something to me that I asked for permission to quote her, and she said that Sandra wrote The House on Mango Street, so she wrote a book about, searching for home, right, or a different home. Esperanza needed to leave her home to be able to be at home, but she would always be writing about home, like sending messages back to home. And then she created the Homeland for Writers here at Macondo, and how amazing that is. And so I think that's just something I really want to, emphasize, I guess, in my remarks, is how important it is to have this community where, as writers, we can read each other's work and become better writers through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful, isn't it? I mean, I think, yeah.